13 Stanley Cups. None since 1967. That's not a slump. That's a man holding a team hostage. Harold Ballard owned the Maple Leafs.
Do I have one word to describe him?
Entertaining.
Blowhard, loudmouth,
cantankerous,
misunderstood, tough,
vindictive,
interesting,
buffoon,
enigma.
He'd also been to prison for robbing them. And there's one trade he made that wasn't about money or players at all. It was about revenge. That's Harold Ballard. Ballard never played a single game in the NHL. He came up through the business side instead, running teams around Toronto since the 1930s, starting with junior clubs and learning the parts of the business nobody else paid attention to, like how arenas got booked and how rosters got built and who in the room owed who a favor. By 1940, he was running the Marlboros, the Leafs' own farm team, which meant he'd spent decades inside the organization before he ever owned a piece of it. That piece came in 1961, when Conn Smythe, the man who built Maple Leaf Gardens, sold most of his shares to a group of three: his son Stafford, a newspaper owner named John Bassett, and Ballard. The price was $2.3 million, and the detail that matters is that Ballard quietly fronted Stafford most of the money. Conn had always claimed he thought he was only selling to his son, but Ballard had bought his way to the center of the whole operation with his name on the paperwork that counted. For a while, it looked like the smartest ownership group in hockey. The Leafs won the Cup in 1962, then 1963, then 1964, and again in 1967. 4 titles in 6 years. And Ballard's job through all of it was to keep the building full and the cash flowing in. He was genuinely good at that part. He booked concerts and religious revivals. He put the Muhammad Ali fight against George Chuvalo into the Gardens, and whatever it took to fill the seats, he went and found it. Then the partners turned on each other. In 1969, the board voted Ballard and Stafford out and handed the presidency to Bassett, which should have ended both of them. It didn't, because Bassett made one mistake and let them keep their shares. Between the two of them, they still controlled almost half the company, and within a year, they'd fought their way back onto the board and forced the issue until, by September 1971, Bassett gave up and sold them his stake for $6 million. Now it was down to 2 men, and money was already leaving Maple Leaf Gardens in ways the public knew nothing about. And the 2 of them were the ones moving it out. The scheme was simple once it was laid out in court. Ballard and Stafford had been treating the Gardens like a personal bank account for years, billing renovations on Ballard's house and cottage to the company, putting limousines for his daughter's 1967 wedding on the corporate tab, even buying motorcycles for his sons and running them through the books as hockey equipment for the Marlboros. On top of that, money that belonged to the corporation kept ending up in a private account that the 2 of them controlled. When the charges finally came, they were specific. 28 counts of fraud tied to roughly $82,000, 21 counts of theft tied to about $123,000, and tax evasion layered over all of it. Altogether, the case centered on around $205,000 of Gardens money, which in today's terms runs well into the millions. Stafford never had to answer for any of it, because 6 weeks after he and Ballard bought out Bassett, he died from a bleeding ulcer at 50. There's a long-running story, never proven, that Ballard talked a drunk Stafford into changing his will. And what's documented is that Ballard then fought Stafford's own brother and son in court over the shares and won. By February 1972, he had taken majority control of the Gardens and the team, installed himself as president and chairman, and walked into the trial alone, where he was convicted on 47 of 49 counts and handed a 9-year sentence. That is the part worth slowing down on, because a sitting NHL owner had just been found guilty of stealing from his own franchise, and any other major league would have treated that as the end of the conversation, stripping the ownership or forcing a sale. The NHL did none of it. No suspension came down, no public statement of concern, no move to pry the team out of his hands, and the league quietly treated a felony conviction as Ballard's personal business and nothing more. He served his time at a minimum security setup attached to Millhaven, where he told reporters the place was like a high-priced motel, with steaks every day, golf and color television, a comment that actually set off a debate in Parliament. He served about a year before walking out on parole in October 1973. And here's what his absence quietly allowed. While he was locked up, a Leafs scout went out and signed a young Swedish defenseman named Börje Salming, which only happened because Ballard was gone and Ballard didn't want European players. Salming became one of the greatest to ever wear the jersey, meaning the owner's own prison sentence was the only reason one of the best signings in franchise history ever got made. Once he was back in charge, the cruelty tended to show up in small, telling ways. He took the players' names off the backs of jerseys, so anyone who wanted to know who was on the ice had to buy a program first. He squeezed in extra seats wherever he could, and at one point took down a large portrait of the Queen to make room for more, explaining to anyone who asked that she hadn't bought a ticket. He even had the Hamilton Tiger Cats logo, a CFL football team he also owned, painted at center ice of the Gardens, right in the middle of the rink the Leafs were supposed to call home. His mouth did about as much damage as his decisions. He went after his own players in the press, and when he wanted to mock the Swedish forward Inga Hammarström, he said the man could skate into the corner with a dozen eggs in his pocket and not break a single one. It stuck to Hammarström for years, and it came from the owner of his own team, said to reporters for Sport. The hockey side ran entirely on his moods, with coaches arriving and leaving on no notice, and the clearest example of it all is Roger Nielsen. Late in the 1978-79 season, Ballard fired him, then watched the players revolt, the fans revolt, and the press turn, until within a couple of days, he reversed himself and brought Nielsen back. That's when he had his idea for the return. He wanted Nielsen to walk out behind the bench with a paper bag over his head, then reveal himself to the crowd like the punchline to a joke. Nielsen refused and just coached the game, and at the end of that season, Ballard fired him for good, dismissing general manager Jim Gregory on the way out too. And then, for the first time in years, it looked like Ballard might actually be serious about winning. To replace Gregory, Ballard reached back into his own history and hired Punch Imlach, the man who'd run the Leafs through the championship years, which read on paper like a serious attempt to fix the franchise and turned out to be the opposite. Imlach came back carrying a grudge against Captain Daryl Sittler, who was active in the Players Union and represented by an agent Imlach couldn't stand, Alan Eagleson. The problem for Imlach was that Sittler held a no-trade clause, so rather than move the captain directly, he set about tearing apart everything around him. That's where the trade comes in. In December 1979, Imlach sent Lanny McDonald to the Colorado Rockies along with Joel Quenneville, bringing back Pat Hickey and Wilf Paymont. And the thing about McDonald was that he was Sittler's closest friend on the team, one of the most loved players in the city, and still scoring. There was no hockey logic to dealing him, only the calculation that it would wound Sittler, and hundreds of fans understood that well enough to protest outside the Gardens. McDonald said later that he believed he was traded out of pure spite, that Imlach just wanted everyone to know who was in charge, and that he refused to even shake the man's hand on his way out the door. Sittler's response was to take a blade to his own sweater, cut the captain's C off the front, and walk away from the captaincy. The team unraveled from there, with the 1979-80 club finishing under 500 and only sneaking into the playoffs because the division around it was weak. Sittler eventually forced his own way out to Philadelphia, which took the last real piece of the contender with him, and Ballard kept salaries deliberately low to keep his players in a weak position while refusing to spend on the scouting other clubs were using to stockpile young talent. Imlach didn't survive it either. In August 1980, he suffered a heart attack, but recovered and came back to run the team for the full 1980-81 season. Then, a second attack hit at training camp in September 1981, and this time, Ballard used the scare to tell the press he was finished. When Imlach tried to return to work anyway, he found his parking spot at the Gardens reassigned and his job already filled. With Imlach gone for good, Ballard ran the team himself, even signing Salming to a contract Imlach had refused him. By then, the owner was the de facto general manager, and the Leafs spent the entire 1980s as one of the worst teams in the league. So the question hangs over all of it. Why did this run for nearly 2 decades after the conviction when none of it was hidden? The fraud had been front-page news, the feuds with players and coaches played out in public for years, and yet he held the franchise until the day he died. The answer is money. Maple Leaf Gardens sold out no matter how bad the team became. People around the league called it the cash box on Carlton. Toronto kept buying tickets for a losing club season after season, so the league had no financial reason to care who owned it or how it was run. A profitable franchise with a convicted thief at the top was still a profitable franchise, and the NHL took the revenue and lived with everything else. The real cost of all this showed up in the standings, where more than 2 decades passed between the last championship and his death in 1990, with no title to show and just 1 trip to the semifinals to point at under Nielsen in 1978. A franchise that had once been the best on the continent spent a full generation as a punchline. The roster thin and the front office hollow, and the whole operation run like a corner store while its rivals modernized around it. Ballard died on April 11th, 1990 at 86, leaving the team in debt and the cupboard bare, and the damage he'd done outlasted him by years, since the Leafs didn't start climbing back until he was finally gone. There's a lesson buried in the whole thing, whether the league ever wanted to look at it or not, because when a sport decides that a full arena matters more than the people filling it, this is what comes out the other side. The fans keep paying, the players carry the weight, the team on the ice pays the most of all, and the man at the top takes his money and walks. You were promised the story of how one man held a dynasty hostage, and now you've got it. This wasn't a bad owner who got unlucky. He robbed his own team, served his time, came back, and spent years running it into the dirt while the league did nothing. None of it was an accident. The Leafs are still chasing what he took from them all those years ago. If breakdowns like this one are what you're here for, consider joining the Healthy Scratch membership. Priority replies to comments, loyalty badges, and exclusive emojis. The join button is right below the video. And subscribe before you go, because what happened after Ballard died is its own disaster. Ownership chaos, a franchise that nearly left Toronto entirely, and a buyer the league quietly blocked. That's next.